Welcome to Yom Hazikaron 5781, the day in which we mourn and commemorate the lives and the memories of all of those soldiers who fought fighting for peace throughout all of Israel's wars, as well as those innocent victims of terror. As COVID has and continues to disrupt what would be an ordinary programming event for such an important date on the calendar, we have prepared the following video presentation where we focus on Yehoshua Friedberg, Jason, of blessed memory. Prior to my arrival at congregation Beth Tikvah, and almost immediately entering the building, the memory and legacy of Yehoshua was something which loomed large, and indeed, so much of this congregation fell underneath his shadow. As the community has heard me say on many occasions, we here in the diaspora carry an unequal burden of responsibility for Medinat Yisrael, the modern state of Israel. We here in the diaspora celebrate 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds as they play at ease with joy and laughter, and as they should, as typical Montrealers enjoying their teenage years. Yet for our brothers and sisters in the state of Israel, at the age of 16 and 17, there is an alternative looming shadow which is on their minds, and that is that at the age of 18, they enter into Tzahal, Israel's defense forces. And for those teenagers, basic training, advanced training, and active combat is their reality. On Yom HaAtzmaut, we wave our flags so proudly and with such ease. And the reason we do so is because of the burden and indeed the sense of responsibility that is carried on the shoulders of the 18, 19 and 20-year-old boys and girls. And let's not forget for a second that they are boys and girls who support and defend the state of Israel, so that we here in the diaspora can have the luxury of simply, from our armchairs, love and support Israel and wave our flags gently as we carry about our day. Tonight you are going to hear from Herb, Yehoshua's father, as well as David and Jen, Yeshua's brother and sister. And in this way, we hope that we can honor Yeshua's memory and be able to honor the memory of all of those who fought, fighting for Israel's wars and freedom. The great poet Natan Alterman signs off in his classic poem, Magash HaKesef, with the following words: Az tish'al ha'umah shotfet dim'a v'kesem v'amra mi atem ha'shnayim shoktim ya'anu la anachnu magash ha'kesef sha'alav lach nitna medinat ha'yudim kach yamru v'naflu l'ragla atfei tzel v'hasha'a yasofer B'toldot Yisrael. So the nation, entranced and in tears, asked and said, "Who are you?" And the two in their stillness responded, "We are the silver platter upon which you have been given the Jewish state." And they said, and then fell at the nation's feet, shrouded in shadow, and the rest will be told in the history of Yisrael. We offer this small, humble presentation as part of the Toldot Yisrael, part of the legacy and history of our people. Could you share with us who Jason was as a kid growing up?
Okay. So, surprisingly to everyone, Jason was a very wild kid. He was my bocher, my firstborn, and he was really a terror. Good kid, but if you did him wrong, you were in trouble.
Like any typical brother relationship, it was pretty normal in the sense that we both went to the same school. We both went to Hebrew Foundation School, and then Herzliya. He was, of course, 2 years older than me. We did sports together, or at least skiing. We skied together every Sunday with my father. And, our house growing up in Dollard was very, I would say religious, in the sense that, we went to synagogue every Saturday, every Shabbat. We did Shabbat dinners. We did all the holidays. So it was fairly religious, and my father especially always supported Israel, especially the community as well. Obviously in Dollard, being one of the first members, I believe, of Beth Tikvah. And from there, probably around bar mitzvah time, I would say my brother started to, I guess, just go to synagogue a lot more, and develop relationships with Rabbi Zeitz, with Rabbi Zeitz, with Avraham Blanchet, and his love for Israel started to flourish, I guess.
So Jason was actually 8 years older than me, so we didn't go to the same school or do any of the same activities, but he made sure to always take care of me and read to me and play with me. And I remember that vividly. I also remember he became more observant around his bar mitzvah and became more interested in Israel. And, he used to study with Rabbi Zeitz and Rabbi Newmark, and he actually tutored for the Chidon HaTanach. He was my tutor. And that was one of the times I remember. Interestingly, although he was observant and people remember him as the great man that he was, but as a teenager, he was, he would misbehave and get in trouble. And he did love heavy metal, and people are always surprised at this. But he was an interesting and very serious guy who also had all these funny parts to him that are, different. And I think a lot of our Zionism came from my mom's parents, my grandparents. They really instilled in my mom some really Zionist attitude of, they always donated money to Israel, and it really brushed off on my parents. And of course, going to Hebrew Foundation and Herzliya kind of cemented it for us.
Stoic, almost quiet, wry sense of humor, like we always had a sense of humor, but very quiet and very strong when it came to Israel. And then he went from Herzliya, where he was a basketball star, and he got an award for best student with athletic prowess, whatever. And his sweater is up in the gymnasium at Herzliya, which is now next to the YMHA. And he went to Israel there was an 8-week trip from Herzliya, and he loved it. And he told me when he came back, I'm going to go to university there. So he basically came back, he got his degree here, and he went, in between finishing his degree, he went for a year at Hebrew University and came back, and he promised he'd get his degree, and then he went back. He made Aliyah, and he didn't tell us anything about going in the army, but he felt the responsibility that if he's going to Israel, it's his responsibility as a Jew, even though he was 24 and they told him, don't go, you're too old. But he was in great shape. I mean, he was really, so he went.
Which year did he make Aliyah?
Just before the Gulf War. It was when he was interviewed on arriving. And they said, why are you coming? It's the Gulf War. And he said, it's on tape. He said, I don't understand your question. So the guy asked it again. He said, tell me, if your house is burning, do you run away from it or do you run towards it to try and save the people? So the guy was flabbergasted. He had nothing to say. So that's how it ended. I mean, and that's who he was. An older fellow, 55 years old, from Cameroon, a black Jew, came, and basically no one really wanted a room with him. He gave him a room. And why I'm mentioning this is because when Jason was buried, he was standing at the funeral with a booklet that he wrote about Yeshua, how he was, anyway, it was very emotional, and I didn't know who he was. I took the book. It's a 4-page black on blue lettering, and he said he saved his life, and he wrote about the hill that Friedberg means mountain, and even in Montreal, he had Catholic friends when he was going to Concordia, and one of them was studying on Sunday, and he says, you said you're a religious Christian. Sunday's your Sabbath. You can't, and she stopped studying. She stopped working or studying on that day. So he had an effect on which I found out later. And this girl wanted to come when we were sitting Shiva here and give me something. And I said, look, I can't, I'm too emotional. So she gave me the Coin's prayer that she wrote in Hebrew. She learned how to write it for him.
It obviously devastated and shook our family. He was following his dream, and then this kind of huge event happened, which stopped all of our dreams and stopped his young life and all of that he had promised. So I was 16, and it was a really, that time is very vivid, but also we forget some of the things. So some things stand out, that he was missing. And then my parents left us to go find him. And then we ended up flying to Israel in a snowstorm with my uncle, he accompanying us. It was a real dramatic series of events that very vivid. But then the time afterward, I don't really remember lots of details, but when we came home, I remember having Shiva with literally hundreds and hundreds of people in our house, and the house basically, part of it collapsed because there were so many people standing in our front room. So, a lot of these vivid, dramatic moments, but afterwards, when you're left to pick up the pieces, it's just like everyday life. You go back to school. Eventually, Dave went back to school. We all had to kind of learn to function in this new reality where Jason wasn't living with us anyway. So he wasn't living with us, but now we know we'd never see him again. So it was a very, difficult thing to move on. But I think our parents mostly did a good job kind of keeping things structured enough for us to, learn to move on, but not forget.
I was 22. She was 16. So he was missing. He was also in the army in the Golani for about, I think it was a year, I believe. So we hadn't seen him in about 2 years, and we spoke a little bit, but it was hard because he was in the army. And then when my parents had to go fly to Israel or to England actually to meet the officials, I was left. I was at home with my sister. I got the call in the middle of the night from my cousin in Israel that with the party that was looking for him. So I had to wake her up and tell her, and it was just very shocking. Obviously, first thing in the morning, I remember seeing it on the news. And I remember the Israeli consulate coming over in the morning with Rabbi Zeitz. It was just very, very hectic. And then we tried to get out in March to go to Israel, and there was a snowstorm. We had to go home, tried again a few days later. And then in Israel, with the funeral, there was about 15,000 people there. It was just very, very hectic. And as you can imagine, But, I was 22 years old. I was in university. So, your life comes to a halt. And you only realize later on in life, when you get married, you have kids, that's when you really realize, at least as a parent, like, what it would be like, not to make it any less because he was my brother, but you just, as an adult and as a father, you really realize what my parents went through. And, they did a good job going on with life and doing normal things, going to synagogue, making sure we had everything we needed for school. We all went on with our lives and got married.
First of all, I have to go back. We didn't know he was dead. Okay, he was still missing. And Rabbi Zeitz and Charlotte Zeitz came to our house and packed us up Thursday, which means we're going to fly on Shabbos. She said, it's okay to save a life. I didn't want to go, but we went, me and Dina, my late wife. And the plane, God was with us maybe because a couple beside us from France had just lost a close relative. So we sat in the plane, and when we told them what our problem, their problem became little. So the plane ride was you couldn't sleep, of course, and we got there, and there was supposed to be the rabbi from United Kingdom meeting us, but I know my way around airports. I've been to many places, and there was a subway, a train. We took a train to the section I was supposed to be in for the next plane, and we totally missed him. And somehow the station manager, young kid, knew, I didn't tell him, that something was amiss. And he gave me his office, and he allowed me to call wherever I wanted, which was amazing. I don't even know the kid. And so I called my relatives, and they were at Karen's father's house, and no one would tell me. Everyone in Montreal knew, but I didn't know yet. We didn't know yet. And I finally said to my nephew, who was studying with Yeshua and was close, I said, Brian, tell me, Baruch. And he said, they found him. And he was the one who started search, because the army didn't start it. The yeshiva Bucher started, and then the army came in. It isn't like here where you have the RCMP and the Quebec police. They have nothing like that. It's one border police and the army. So the army searches for their own. Anyway, so they found him 7 days later. He went missing Sunday, Purim. He was going for officer's tests. He was picked. And Friday they found him, and they want to bury him. And I arrived Saturday. I don't know, Friday morning. I don't know, Saturday morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I assumed there's going to be an army truck with guns, and we're going to go kill these people. In my head, I had that stupid idea. Anyway, so now they're burying him. I said, my kids aren't here. There's no way. So I called Rabbi Zeitz, and then I called the army, and they said, don't, we'll stop. So he was buried Monday. It was supposed to be a 2-minute burial, but it wasn't. Anyway, my kids were supposed to come Sunday, but there was the storm of the century. March, he died 7th, it was 12th or something. It was a terrible storm. They left to go Shabbos, and the roads were blocked. They came back here. There was 3,000 people were here at Saturday because they heard about it. And they finally got there the next day. So it was awful. I mean, it was like 1/5 of your body is pulled out. I mean, it was hard to believe.
The legacy is an unbelievable one. If you think about both of us, our firstborn are named after Jason. So Jacqueline and Judah, but then countless people named their children after him. I can't even think of how many, like, old friends, cousins, just tons and tons of people. So that's a literal legacy. But then, the legacy that I think is amazing is that he really followed his dream, and we should all be able to do that, So that's what I feel is amazing, that he followed his dream, his love for Israel, and, our family still love Israel and are involved in supporting Israel and visit when we can.
We think about it every day, not necessarily in a bad way. But on Yom Hazikaron, for me, it's more about the ties that we obviously have with Israel and with the people. And we learned about it our whole lives in elementary school and high school, but you feel it a lot more during Yom Hazikaron. And people always ask me. I have friends today that send their kids to Israel and maybe even to the army, and they always ask me like how I feel about it. And I encourage them. It's something that I still believe is good to do. And again, for me, Yom Hazikaron is just remembering all the sacrifices. I forget the amount in the 20,000s that were lost since Israel's formation. But that's what makes us strong, is that we keep, people keep doing it, and yeah. And what makes it even more nice is the right after, for Yom Ha'atzmaut, going from the sadness to the extreme sadness to the joyfulness of Yom Ha'atzmaut is something really nice to see.
When I was at the Shamar where his body was, his friends were all around, and they were watching his body before the funeral. And one of them took me aside and said, "Mr. Friedberg, I don't know if you know, but Jason, Yeshua, he'd lend money to people, and he'd mark it out in a book, and when the guy wasn't looking, he'd cross it out. So when the guy would come back, he'd say, Yeshua, I owe you." He said, "Okay." He'd check. No, look, it's marked off. He said, "I owe it." He said, "No." So that's one story. And basically, I was sending him money, and he was giving charity basically in my name, which is the highest form. Very nice. The other story is at the funeral. I'm coming, we're finishing, and we're going into a taxi to go home. And this guy who was bothering everyone, the whole funeral, who was climbing with a kapata, with a black hat, with payas, was climbing on trees to get a view. And I'm saying to myself, usually I'm out of it. I'm like, I'm going to kill this guy. Anyway, he comes to the taxi. "Mr. Friedberg, I'm Sholem Bloom, and he lent me $1,000. I paid him $500. I have the 500 more." I said, "Just give it to charity." A story was told to me. Ari Fuld, it's a story in itself, takes me to a bar mitzvah. And the fellow comes up to me after the mitzvah father. He says, "You know that I know Yeshua." So Ari Fuld says, "What do you mean you knew him? You didn't know him." I said, "What do you mean? We're all the same group. We're all in Golani." He said, "But you didn't know him." He said, "Well, let me tell you the story." He says, "We're signing in, they thought Jason was the Madriach because he spoke Hebrew perfectly. None of these turkeys did. They were all from New York. They didn't speak like him. So he lost his kit bag. So Jason says, what's wrong?" He says, "I lost my kit bag." He says, "Don't worry." So he goes, and we know now, he gave him his kit bag, and then he went to gather pants for himself. I said, "How do you know?" He says, "I know, because I asked him later, 'What did you give me?' He said, 'I gave you mine. It's okay.'"
Yeshua Friedberg Memorial Foundation that subsidizes kids in North America that want to go to do a Hesder program, which is part yeshiva, part army, and serve for Israel. So it's subsidized every year. Someone gets to go and pay for a good portion of that. So that's something that's been going on for 28 years now. And even the Bible contest. I mean, to this day, I have clients for example, in Winnipeg, that was telling me his son won the Bible contest a couple of years ago, and he's like, "Was that your brother?" And I told him, and he was like shocked. And he's part of the Orthodox community in Winnipeg, and he just never put the two. We never discussed it. So every year now he texts me on Yom Hazikaron that he's thinking of us, and I hear stories like this, hundreds of stories since '93 from people all over the place that are telling me stories that their kids are going to Israel now because of my brother. Or I just hear of people that I never even knew were friends with him, and affected their lives so much that it's sometimes it's unbelievable. Like you can't even believe it sometimes.
When you have a family like I have, a great marriage, an amazing wife, tremendous kids. I mean, I never really had trouble with any of my kids. They're really good kids. They rarely fought, which I can't say for most. And then, of course, the social network, as I said, in the synagogue, and my friends, my observant friends here, were key for me surviving. In his short 24 years, he did more from many great scholars will ever do. And he said, Rabbi Zeit said, we learn from him. We follow his steps.
Yom Hazikaron לחללי מערכות ישראל ולנפגעי פעולות האיבה. Memorial Day for those fallen soldiers and victims of terror. Something which is a holy, sacred day in the land of Israel and indeed across the entire Jewish world. Here in Montreal, it takes on an added level of significance as the presence of Yeshua Friedberg fills this entire synagogue, indeed the entire community and city. We pledge never to forget, we pledge to always remember, and we also pledge to be able to lead lives of meaning, with Medinat Yisrael, Tzahal, at the very center of our lives, using Yeshua's legacy to inspire us and to spur us on to greater heights. For Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, with the Torat Yisrael as our guide. We hope you enjoyed and were able to find meaning in this evening's program. As we bring Yom Hazikaron to a close, we want to be able to wish all of those soldiers who have passed, killed, and all of those who were citizens of Israel, victims of terror throughout these years, and indeed their families, the beauty of memory and the power in knowing that their legacy will always live on. Yehi Zechro Baruch, may Yeshua's memory always be for a blessing. Amen.